She was stood up on her wedding day, and the billionaire whispered, "Pretend I am the groom." The silence in the church wasn't sacred. It was toxic, heavy, suffocating. It had been 45 minutes since the wedding march should have played, but the organ remained mute and the altar empty. Ngozi stood before 300 guests, her hands clutching her bouquet of white roses so tightly that the stems began to break under the pressure of her trembling fingers. Cold sweat trickled down her back under the cheap but beautiful lace of her gown, the one her grandmother, Mama Ciniere, had hand-sewn for months, sacrificing her sleep so her granddaughter could look like a princess. But at that moment, Ngozi didn't feel like a princess. She felt like a circus animal, exposed for public mockery. A murmur swept through the wooden pews like a swarm of angry wasps. Kunle, the groom's aunts fanned their faces with exaggerated gestures of impatience, while his cousins checked their phones, probably posting on social media about the impending disaster. But the worst wasn't the murmurs. It was the gaze coming from the front row. Mrs. Obaseki, Kunle's mother, sat ramrod straight, immaculate in a champagne-colored designer gown that cost more than the entire wedding. She didn't look worried. She didn't check her watch. She looked at Ngozi, and in her dark, cold eyes, there was no pity, only triumph. An almost imperceptible smile curved her blood-red painted lips. She knew something Ngozi didn't. "Where is he?" Ngozi whispered, her voice cracking, turning to her father, a humble, hard-working man who wrung his hands in shame. "He's not answering his phone, my daughter." Nobody knows anything. Just then, the side doors of the sacristy burst open. It wasn't Kunle who entered, it was his best man, a short, nervous type named Tayo, who avoided everyone's eyes. He walked fast, almost running, ignoring the reverend, and heading directly towards Ngozi. The sound of his shoes echoed like gunshots in the quiet of the temple. When he reached her, he didn't offer a hug or an explanation. He handed her a crumpled piece of paper, a simple page torn hastily from a notebook. "I'm sorry, Ngozi," Tayo said softly before turning and almost fleeing, as if the altar were on fire. Ngozi's heart stopped. Her hands released the bouquet, which fell to the floor with a dull thud, scattering white petals on the red carpet. With numb fingers, she unfolded the note. Kunle's handwriting was unmistakable, but the words seemed written by a stranger, by a monster. "I can't do this. My mother is right. I can't marry a pauper and ruin my future. This world is not for you, Ngozi. Find someone of your class. Don't look for me." The air left her lungs. The pain wasn't sharp. It was an immense void, as if the ground had opened to swallow her. Pauper. Those words echoed in her head with Mrs. Obaseki's voice. Kunle had never spoken like that. Kunle had promised her eternal love in the rain. He had sworn that money didn't matter, that together they would build something great. It had all been a lie, a cruel and elaborate lie. A sob escaped her throat, an agonizing sound that broke the protocol and dignity of the moment. Ngozi clasped both hands over her mouth, trying to contain the scream of despair that threatened to shatter her. Tears burst forth, hot and humiliating, blurring her vision. She heard a dry laugh. Looking up, she saw Mrs. Obaseki standing elegantly, smoothing her skirt. "Well, the show is over," Mrs. Obaseki announced in a powerful voice, turning to the guests. "Let's go. Be grateful my son had the good sense not to make the biggest mistake of his life." The humiliation was complete. Ngozi wanted to disappear, to disintegrate into atoms and cease to exist. She closed her eyes, waiting for the sound of people's footsteps abandoning her, waiting for absolute solitude. But then the sound she heard was different. It wasn't footsteps of retreat. It was footsteps of authority. Heavy, firm, slow. Clack, clack, clack. Someone was walking down the central aisle, not towards the exit, but towards the altar. The rhythm was so imposing that the murmurs ceased abruptly. Even Mrs. Obaseki stopped midway, her mouth agape. Ngozi opened her eyes through her tears. A tall, dark figure was silhouetted against the light from the entrance. A man dressed in a bespoke black suit that screamed power and money, with a white, open-collared shirt, no tie, giving him an air of dangerous rebellion. His dark brown hair was slicked back, and a 3-day beard shadowed a square, tense jaw. Chief Emeka Okoro, the magnate, the man everyone in the city feared, the majority shareholder of the conglomerate where Kunle worked as a mere junior manager. No one knew why he was invited. It was supposed to be a boring social obligation for him, but there he was, advancing like a predator in his territory. Emeka didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at Mrs. Obaseki, who paled at the sight of him, taking a step back, as if she had seen a ghost. His eyes, electric blue and piercing, were fixed solely on Ngozi. There was no pity in his gaze. There was fury, a contained, cold, and calculating fury. He climbed the altar steps without asking permission. The Reverend recoiled, intimidated by the man's sheer physical presence. Emeka stopped in front of Ngozi, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne, tobacco, and danger. Ngozi, paralyzed by fear and confusion, could barely breathe. He looked down at her, assessing the damage, seeing the tears, the smudged makeup, the trembling of her hands. Then he did something unthinkable. He leaned slowly towards her. His face was millimeters from hers. Ngozi felt the heat of his breath on her ear, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. The closeness was overwhelming, intimate, forbidden. "Pretend I am the groom," Emeka whispered in a hoarse, fierce voice, so low that only she could hear it, but laden with an intensity that made her tremble. "Don't cry for that trash. Lift your head. If you walk out of here crying, they will destroy you. If you marry me, you will destroy them." Ngozi turned her face, trapped in the immensity of those blue eyes. Marry him now. The madness of the proposal made her dizzy. "What?" she tried to articulate. "Say yes," he commanded. And it wasn't a request, it was a command. "Either you walk out of here as the abandoned pauper that witch wants you to be, or you walk out on my arm as the owner of everything they could never have. Decide now." Time seemed to distort. Seconds felt like hours under Emeka's relentless gaze. Ngozi looked over the magnate's shoulder and saw Mrs. Obaseki's face. The matriarch no longer smiled. Her eyes were wide, her skin, usually pristine, covered in a sheen of sweat. The fear on the face of the woman who had just mocked her was the catalyst. The pain in Ngozi's chest transformed into something harder, colder. Rage. Ngozi swallowed her tears, straightened her spine, which a second ago seemed made of broken glass. She looked at Emeka and nodded. A slight, but definitive movement. Emeka did not smile. It wasn't a moment of happiness. It was a contract of war. He turned to the Reverend, an elderly man who was watching the scene with his mouth open, clutching his Bible as if it were a shield. "Reverend, proceed," Emeka said. His voice was not a whisper this time. It resonated in the church's vaults, clear, potent, authoritative. "But Mr. Okoro, this is irregular." "The documents." "The groom is Kunle," the Reverend stammered, looking around for an escape. "I am the groom," Emeka interrupted, taking a step towards the Reverend. His tone lowered in volume but increased in threat. "And the documents will be arranged with a very generous donation for the repair of this church's roof, which from what I see is falling apart. Do we have an understanding, or would you prefer I call the bishop right now?" The Reverend swallowed loudly. He knew the power of the Okoro name. With trembling hands, he opened the book to the marked page. "This is a farce!" The cry came from the front row. Mrs. Obaseki had regained her voice. She advanced towards the altar with her index finger raised, trembling with indignation. "You cannot do this. That woman was engaged to my son. She is a fortune hunter. Emeka, do you know who you are getting involved with? She is a—" Emeka turned slowly. He didn't need to shout. He just looked at her. It was a look laden with so much contempt and warning that Mrs. Obaseki was struck dumb, as if her vocal cords had been cut. "Mrs. Obaseki," Emeka said with terrifying calm, "your son fled. The social contract was broken, and I suggest you measure your next word very carefully, because it turns out I own the mortgage debt on your house, your car, and the credit line keeping your mediocre family business afloat. If you ruin this moment, tomorrow you will be living under a bridge. Sit down." A collective gasp swept through the church. The threat was so brutal and public that no one dared to breathe. Mrs. Obaseki turned white as paper. Her legs failed her, and she fell back into the pew, defeated, humiliated before the very audience she intended to impress. Emeka turned his attention back to Ngozi, taking her hand. His grip was strong, rough, possessive. It wasn't Kunle's soft, sweaty hand. It was the hand of a man who built empires and destroyed enemies. The warmth of his skin burned hers. "Proceed," Emeka ordered the Reverend. The ceremony was surreal. Ngozi felt like she was floating outside her body, watching a stranger in a wedding dress marry an incredibly handsome and dangerous unknown man. The Reverend skipped the sermon and went straight to the vows, sensing the urgency in the air. "Chief Emeka Okoro, do you take Ngozi as your lawful wife, to love and cherish her?" Emeka did not take his eyes off Ngozi's tear-filled eyes. "I do," he said. He didn't promise to love her. His tone sounded as if he was saying, "I accept the challenge." "Ngozi." The Reverend turned to her. She looked at the engagement ring on her finger, the cheap ring Kunle had given her. Then she looked at Emeka. In his blue eyes, she saw an abyss. But she also saw refuge, an impregnable fortress where Mrs. Obaseki's mockery couldn't touch her. "I do," she whispered. Her voice came out firmer than she expected. "You may kiss the bride." The moment of truth. Ngozi tensed. She expected a chaste, quick, awkward kiss, but Emeka did nothing by halves. He took her by the waist with a firm hand, pulling her towards his body until her breasts met his hard chest. With his other hand, he cradled the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her dark hair, forcing her to tilt her head back. He kissed her. It wasn't a romantic kiss. It was a kiss of marking. His lips were demanding, expert, devouring hers, with an intensity that left her breathless. Ngozi felt her legs give way, clutching the lapels of his black suit to keep from falling. For a second, she forgot Kunle, she forgot the church, she forgot her name. There was only Emeka's taste, the strength of his body, and the silent promise that her life had just changed forever. When they separated, she was gasping, her lips swollen and red. He looked at her, and for a microsecond, the mask of coldness fell, and there was a flicker of something more. Desire, curiosity, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. Emeka turned to the stunned congregation, entwining his fingers with Ngozi's, and raising their joined hands in a gesture of victory. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in a baritone voice, "the party is over for you. My wife and I have more important things to do." Without waiting for congratulations, he pulled her towards the central aisle. Ngozi had to quicken her pace to keep up with his long strides. They walked among the guests who watched them with a mix of envy, terror, and awe. As they passed Mrs. Obaseki, Ngozi did not lower her head. She met her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she saw fear in the old witch's gaze. They exited the church into the blinding light of the afternoon sun. An armored black luxury SUV, elegant and enormous, was already waiting at the foot of the steps with a driver opening the rear door. Emeka practically pushed her into the vehicle, shielding her from the curious glances of passers-by. He entered after her, and the door closed, isolating them from the world in a bubble of leather, silence, and air conditioning. The car started smoothly. Ngozi slumped against the backrest, her heart pounding 1,000 beats per hour, waiting for him to say something, to explain, to comfort her, to tell her everything would be all right. Emeka loosened his shirt collar, sighed wearily, and pulled his mobile phone from his pocket. His posture relaxed, but the coldness returned with greater force. He didn't even look at her when he spoke. "Dry your tears, Ngozi. There's no audience anymore. The show is over." "The show?" she asked, confused, feeling a new kind of coldness run through her body. "Exactly." Emeka typed something on his phone without looking up. "You needed to save your honor. I urgently needed a wife to close a deal with some traditional Japanese investors tomorrow morning. They demand a family man, and my bachelorhood was a problem. Now we both have what we want. It's business." Ngozi felt as if she had been slapped. "Business?" she repeated incredulously. "You saved me for business?" "I saved you because you served my purpose," he said, finally turning to look at her. His blue eyes were pure ice. "Now, don't misunderstand. I am not your Prince Charming. I am your boss, and you have just signed the most expensive contract of your life. Welcome to my world." The silence inside the SUV became denser than the stale church air. The soft hum of the engine and the sound insulation from outside created a bubble of unreality. Ngozi looked out the tinted window, as the city she knew, with its noisy streets and modest shops, quickly faded to give way to the wide, tree-lined avenues of the capital's most exclusive area. Every kilometer they advanced was another step away from her old life, from her shamed father, from the debts, and from Kunle's betrayal. "Business," she repeated the word, tasting ash in her mouth. She turned to Emeka, who was still focused on his phone screen, ignoring her presence as if she were part of the leather upholstery. "So that's what I am to you, an acquisition, like a bankrupt company you bought cheap?" Emeka locked his phone with a dry flick of his thumb and looked at her. His blue eyes scanned her wedding dress, pausing at the lace Mama Ciniere had sewn with so much love, and which now, under the cold light of the SUV, seemed pathetic and out of place. "Don't belittle yourself, Ngozi. Bankrupt companies often have valuable assets that just need good management," he said with a clinical, emotionless tone. "And yes, you are an acquisition, but I suggest you change your perspective. 10 minutes ago, you were a victim, the poor abandoned girl at the altar everyone would laugh at for years. Now you are Chief Emeka Okoro's wife. Nobody laughs at my wife. I have given you respect, protection, and a status that useless Kunle could never have offered you in 10 lifetimes. I didn't ask for any of this, she retorted, feeling rage warm her cheeks. I could have walked out of that church alone. Emeka let out a brief, harsh, humorless laugh. Alone? He leaned towards her, invading her space again, forcing her back against the door. And you would walk out shattered. Your family owes months of rent. Your father is about to lose his small mechanic workshop. Kunle took your grandmother's savings, didn't he? You don't need to tell me. I see it on your face. Without me, today you would be crying over unpaid bills. With me, you will sleep on Egyptian silk sheets. It's a fair exchange. I get the image of stability from my Japanese partners, and you get financial security. Ngozi froze. How did he know all that? The depth of his knowledge about her misery made her feel naked, vulnerable. He hadn't appeared by chance. He had investigated her, chosen her like one chooses a racehorse. And what do I have to do? She asked, her voice barely audible, surrendering to the crushing logic of her situation. Simple. Emeka leaned back again, crossing his legs. Be perfect. Smile in photos, accompany me to charity dinners, pretend you adore me, and most importantly, never, under any circumstances, ask me questions about my private life, my schedules, or my past. In this house, I am the law. I don't want drama, I don't want jealous scenes, and I don't want tears. Understood? Ngozi nodded slowly, feeling the trap close around her neck. She had escaped public humiliation, only to enter a private prison. The luxury SUV slowed down and turned into a monumental entrance. Enormous black wrought iron gates, crowned with golden spikes, opened slowly. Armed security guards flanked the entrance, nodding respectfully at the vehicle. They entered a property that looked more like a fortress than a home. The gardens were manicured with surgical precision. Not a leaf out of place, not a withered flower. Everything was perfect, controlled, and cold. In the background stood the mansion, an imposing structure of modern architecture with large glass windows, concrete, and steel. It didn't look like a house where a family lived. It looked like a museum, or the headquarters of a multinational corporation. The car stopped in front of the massive wooden main door. The driver opened the door, and Emeka got out first, adjusting his jacket. He didn't offer her a hand to help her out. Ngozi had to struggle with the train of her dress to exit the vehicle, feeling clumsy and small before the magnitude of the building. At the entrance, a severe-looking housekeeper, dressed in an impeccable gray uniform, awaited them with her hands clasped in front. "Welcome home, Mr. Okoro," the woman said, without showing an ounce of surprise at seeing Ngozi in a wedding dress. "Thank you, Mrs. Kemi. She is Ngozi, my wife," Emeka announced, with the same casualness with which he would have presented a new piece of furniture. "Prepare the blue room for her and get rid of that dress. I want her to have a complete wardrobe befitting her new position by tomorrow. Call the stylists." "Yes, sir." Emeka turned to Ngozi, looking at her one last time before entering. "Welcome to your new life, Ngozi. Try not to break anything. I have work to do." Without another word, he entered the house, his footsteps echoing on the polished marble floor, leaving her standing there on the threshold, feeling the cold evening wind seep through the lace of her dress, realizing that although she was surrounded by millions, she had never felt poorer in her entire life. The interior of the mansion was even more intimidating than the exterior. Everything was white, gray, and black. Italian designer furniture that looked uncomfortable to use, cold metal abstract sculptures, and double-height ceilings that made any sound get lost in the echo. There were no family photos, no warmth, no trace that a human being with feelings lived there. It was a mausoleum of luxury. Mrs. Kemi, the housekeeper, guided Ngozi up a floating glass staircase to the second floor. The woman didn't speak, and her rubber heels made no sound, which increased the ghostly sensation of the place. "This will be your room, madam," Mrs. Kemi said, opening a double door at the end of the corridor. Ngozi entered timidly. The room was larger than her father's entire house. A king-size canopy bed dominated the center, dressed in immaculate white sheets. There was an enormous walk-in closet, a private bathroom with a jacuzzi, and a balcony overlooking the back gardens. Everything was beautiful, but impersonal. It looked like a five-star hotel suite where no one stays more than one night. "Mr. Okoro's room is in the east wing, across the hallway," Mrs. Kemi informed, noticing Ngozi's lost gaze. "He values his privacy and rest very much. Mr. Okoro usually works very late and does not like to be disturbed. Dinner is served at 8 o'clock in the main dining room. If you need anything else, just press the intercom button." Mrs. Kemi withdrew, closing the door with a soft but definitive click. Ngozi was left alone. The silence hit her again. She walked to the full-length mirror in a corner and looked at herself. The image reflected back was desolate. The makeup, smudged by tears, formed black streaks on her pale cheeks. The elegant hairstyle had come undone, letting rebellious strands fall over her face. The dress, that dress that had been the center of her illusions for months, now seemed like a ridiculous costume. With trembling hands, she searched for the zipper on her back. She struggled with the fabric, feeling a growing desperation, a visceral need to rip off that second skin that tied her to the memory of Kunle's betrayal. When the dress finally fell to the floor, forming a puddle of tulle and lace at her feet, Ngozi kicked it away. She stood in her underwear, hugging herself, feeling the cold of the air conditioning prickle her skin. She stepped into the shower, turned the hot water faucet to maximum, and stayed there under the scalding stream, scrubbing her skin until it was red, as if she wanted to clean not only the sweat but also the feeling of pitying glances in the church and Emeka's calculating coldness. She cried. She cried until she had no more tears, letting the water carry her pain down the drain. Upon emerging, wrapped in a soft terry cloth bathrobe she found in the bathroom, she felt empty, but a little more human. She stepped out onto the balcony. Night had fallen. Below, the garden lights illuminated the infinity pool. And beyond, in the opposite wing of the house, she saw a light on. Through the window, she could make out Emeka's silhouette. He was sitting in front of an enormous desk, surrounded by screens and papers. He had removed his jacket and tie, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up. He didn't look like the arrogant magnate at that moment. He ran a hand over his face with a gesture of deep, almost painful exhaustion. He was drinking something from a short glass, probably whiskey, and looking at a document with obsessive intensity. Ngozi felt a strange pang. Curiosity, perhaps. This man had the world at his feet, but he spent his wedding night locked away working, completely alone. She remembered his warning. "Do not ask me questions about my private life." What the hell was Chief Emeka Okoro hiding behind that wall of money and arrogance? The clock struck 8. Ngozi, feeling the emptiness in her stomach, had eaten nothing all day due to wedding nerves. She went down to the dining room. The table was very long, dark wood, set for 12 people, but there were only 2 place settings, one at each end, separated by meters of distance. Emeka was already there. He didn't stand when she entered. He didn't even look up from his electronic tablet. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the opposite seat without looking at her. Dinner was a silent torture. The household staff served exquisite dishes that Ngozi could barely taste. The sound of cutlery against porcelain was the only noise in the room. Emeka ate mechanically, checking emails, responding to brief calls in English and Japanese with a harsh, professional tone. She didn't exist for him. "Emeka," she tried, breaking the silence. She needed to know something, anything. She needed to validate her own existence in that house. He looked up slowly with an expression of contained annoyance. "Yes? I wanted to thank you. I know it's business, as you said. But what you did in the church, confronting Mrs. Obaseki, no one had ever done something like that for me before." Emeka put down his cutlery and took a sip of wine. He looked at her intently, and for a moment Ngozi thought she saw a shadow of something ancient and dark in his eyes. "Don't get confused, Ngozi. I didn't do it for you. I hate bullies, and Mrs. Obaseki is a fourth-rate bully." His voice hardened. "And regarding our current situation, do not expect romance. Do not expect me to share my bed with you. You have your room, I have mine. Tomorrow, the lawyers will come with the prenuptial agreement and confidentiality clauses. Read it well." "And what if I refuse to sign?" she asked, a flicker of her wounded pride resurfacing. "You won't, because the alternative is to go back to the street with your father's debts and shame. And you are a survivor, Ngozi. I saw it in your eyes at the altar. You are afraid, but you are not stupid." He stood up abruptly, throwing his napkin on the table. "Good night. I have a conference call with Tokyo in 10 minutes. Don't wait up for me. In fact, don't ever wait up for me." Emeka left the dining room, leaving her alone in front of a plate of cold food and an untouched glass of wine. Ngozi sat staring at the empty chair. She felt a mix of relief that he wouldn't try to consummate the marriage by force, but also a deep humiliation. "Don't ever wait up for me." She went up to her room, got into the immense bed, and turned off the light. In the darkness, hugging a strange pillow that smelled of expensive fabric, Ngozi understood the reality of her destiny. She had married the most powerful man in the city, a man who seemed to have everything but was hollow inside. And now she was just another ornament in his collection, trapped in a wedding night without kisses, without love, and without hope. But as she closed her eyes, a silent promise formed in her mind. I will survive this, and someday, Chief Emeka Okoro, you will see me. You will truly see me. 3 days passed. 3 days of a sepulchral silence that weighed more than shouts. Ngozi moved through the mansion like a ghost at her own funeral. She had a wardrobe full of designer clothes that Emeka had ordered for her. Silk dresses, red-soled shoes, discreet but extremely expensive jewelry. Yet, she felt like she was in costume. Every time she looked in the mirror, she didn't see Mrs. Okoro. She saw the stupid girl who was fooled by a pretty smile and empty promises. Emeka kept his word. She barely saw him. He left before she woke up, and returned when she was already locked in her room. The solitude was absolute, only interrupted by the mechanical, "Good morning, madam," from the service staff. But that afternoon, boredom and desperation pushed her out of her room. She needed a book to distract her mind, something. She went downstairs, heading towards where she knew Emeka's study was, intending to look for the library. As she approached the east wing corridor, she heard voices. The solid mahogany door of the study was ajar by just a few centimeters. It wasn't Emeka's voice speaking in Japanese or business English. It was his voice in English, raw, charged with an anger that made the air vibrate. And he was shouting, "Don't come to me with cheap excuses, Mrs. Obaseki." Emeka's voice thundered. Ngozi froze, her feet stuck to the Persian carpet. Mrs. Obaseki. He was talking to her ex-mother-in-law. Her heart began to pound in her throat. She crept closer, holding her breath, pressing her ear to the crack in the door. "Listen to me well, you old harridan," Emeka continued, and a fist was heard striking the desk. "I don't give a damn where your son is hiding. What I care about is the embezzlement. I know perfectly well that Kunle didn't just flee out of fear of commitment. He emptied the accounts, took every last kobo of Mama Chinyere's savings. 50 years of an old woman's work stolen to fund his escape to Dubai." Ngozi felt the world tilt. She covered her mouth to stifle a cry. Her grandmother's savings, the money for her cataract surgery. Kunle had told her the bank had blocked the account by mistake, that everything would be sorted after the honeymoon. It had all been a lie. He had not only stood her up, he had looted her family, leaving them in total ruin. "That money will reappear," Emeka was saying, his voice lethal. "Because if it doesn't, Mrs. Obaseki, I swear I will foreclose on your house tomorrow. And no, I am not interested in your surname or your cheap social status. To me, you and your son are common criminals." Ngozi couldn't listen anymore. Hot, liquid rage flooded her veins, erasing fear, erasing caution. She pushed the door with both hands, throwing it open. The wood slammed against the wall with a crash. Emeka, who was standing behind his immense glass desk, phone glued to his ear and tie loosened, turned, startled. Seeing Ngozi's distraught face, his expression tensed. He hung up the phone without saying goodbye and threw it on the table. "May I know what you're doing spying?" he asked, instantly regaining his mask of coldness. But Ngozi was not intimidated. She walked towards him, trembling with pure indignation. "You knew?" Her voice broke. "You knew Kunle stole from my grandmother, and you didn't tell me anything?" Emeka sighed, running a hand through his hair. He didn't deny anything. He didn't apologize. "Yes, I knew. I found out the day of the wedding, hours before the ceremony. My financial investigators tracked Kunle's movements." "And you kept quiet?" she shouted, slamming her hands on the desk. "You let me put on the dress. You let me go to the church like an idiot, knowing he wasn't just not going to show up, but that he had left us in destitution. What kind of monster are you?" "I am the monster who saved you," he retorted, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. "If I had told you earlier, you would have canceled the wedding. Mrs. Obaseki would have gotten away with it, inventing an excuse to cover the theft. And you would be crying in a police station, filing a report that would lead nowhere." "It's my grandmother's money!" Ngozi felt tears burning her eyes. "You have millions. To you, that's small change, but to us, it's life. And you're there negotiating with that witch as if it were a game of chess." "It is a game of chess, Ngozi," Emeka said, circling the desk and approaching her. "And thanks to me keeping quiet and marrying you, I now have the advantage. I bought Kunle's debt. I also bought your grandmother's debt, so the bank wouldn't take her house. Legally, I now own everyone's problems. I have them in my hand, Mrs. Obaseki, Kunle, and yes, you too." Ngozi recoiled, looking at him in horror. "You didn't do it out of pity. You didn't do it to help me. You did it to possess us, to have control." Emeka stared at her, his blue eyes impassive. Control is the only thing that matters in this world. Pity is for the weak. Kunle had pity on himself and fled. I don't have pity. I have plans and you are part of them. So stop crying over your grandmother's money. I already ordered it replenished in her account this morning. The economic problem is solved. Now, behave like my wife and stop acting like a spoiled child. You are worse than them, Ngozi whispered, feeling deep disgust. Kunle is a coward, but you are a soulless tyrant. I bought you. I saved you, he corrected her sharply. And someday you will thank me for it. Now get out of my study. I have work. Ngozi looked at him one last time, feeling that the air in that room had become unbreathable. She turned and ran towards the door. She couldn't be there. She couldn't be in that house for another minute. Ngozi ran down the hallway, blinded by tears. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she needed air. You bought me? The words echoed in her head. Her grandmother, her dignity, her future. Everything was in the hands of that calculating man who saw her as just another asset on his balance sheet. She reached the main staircase, ran down the steps 2 by 2, stumbling over her own feet. Ngozi, she heard Emeka's voice behind her, following her. Don't take another step towards that door. You signed a contract. To hell with your contract, she shouted, turning on the landing. But as she turned, the world spun violently. The lights of the chandelier above her head became blurry streaks. The floor seemed to rise to hit her. A sharp ringing filled her ears, silencing Emeka's voice. She felt a sudden, brutal nausea rise from her stomach. Her knees buckled. The last thing she saw was Emeka's figure running towards her, his face transforming from anger to panic, before everything went black. The smell of antiseptic was the first thing that brought her back. She opened her eyes slowly. She wasn't in her room. She was in a white room with machines beeping rhythmically. A private clinic. She tried to sit up, but a firm hand gently stopped her by the shoulder. Quiet. Don't move too fast. You had a severe drop in blood pressure. Ngozi focused her vision. A doctor in a white coat looked at her kindly, and behind him, standing by the window, arms crossed and face grim, was Emeka. He wasn't wearing his jacket, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, showing tense forearms. He looked like he hadn't slept. What? What happened? Ngozi asked, feeling weak. The doctor smiled slightly, checking a folder in his hands. You fainted, Mrs. Okoro. The stress of the last few days has been too much for your body. But don't worry, the tests are fine. However, there is some news you should know. Ngozi felt a knot in her stomach. She looked at Emeka. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the floor, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like his teeth would break. What news? She whispered. You're pregnant, Ngozi, the doctor said softly, about 6 weeks along. The silence that followed that sentence was absolute. Ngozi felt her blood run cold. Pregnant. She instinctively brought her hands to her flat stomach. It couldn't be. Kunle. It was Kunle's child. A child of the man who had robbed her, humiliated her, and abandoned her. A child of Misu Sobaseki's blood. No, she whimpered, covering her face with her hands. It can't be. Oh God. No. She started to cry. Not tears of joy, but of pure terror. What was going to happen now? Emeka would kick her out. Who would want to raise the child of his enemy? The contract would break. She would be back on the street, but now, with a baby on the way, forever tied to the family that had ruined her life. Leave us alone. Emeka's voice cut through the air. It was grave, deep, but strangely devoid of anger. Mr. Okoro, the patient needs, the doctor began. I said leave us alone. Emeka roared, turning with such violence that the doctor recoiled in fright and almost ran out of the room. The door closed. Emeka stood there, breathing heavily. Ngozi cowered in bed, waiting for the shouts, waiting for him to tell her to pack her things and leave. But Emeka didn't shout. He walked slowly to the chair beside the bed and sat down. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees and burying his face in his hands. For the first time since she met him at the altar, he looked vulnerable. He looked broken. A child, he murmured, his voice muffled. A child from that family. I'm sorry, Ngozi cried. I'll go. You don't have to carry this burden. I'll leave today. Shut up, he interrupted, lifting his head. His eyes were red, bright, but not from crying, from a feverish intensity. You're not going anywhere, and you're not getting rid of that child. But why? Ngozi was confused. It's Kunle's son. It's Misu Sobaseki's grandson. You hate them. Emeka stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to her. He looked out at the city lights. Do you know why I bought Kunle's debt? Do you know why I hate Misu Sobaseki so much? It's not business, Ngozi. It was never business. He paused for a long time, as if the words physically pained him to utter. 5 years ago, I was married. My wife's name was Adana. She was 8 months pregnant. We were going to have a daughter. His voice broke, but he continued. One day, she was driving to our country home. She was going down the mountain road. Her car brakes failed on a curve. She fell down a 50-meter ravine. Ngozi held her breath, horror paralyzing her. They both died instantly, Emeka said, turning to look at her. His face was a mask of pure pain. The investigation revealed that the road was poorly constructed, the asphalt was of poor quality, the banking was poorly designed. The construction company had cut costs on materials to pocket the difference. That construction company was owned by Mrs. Obaseki's late husband. Mrs. Obaseki signed the papers for that project. Her greed killed my wife and my daughter. Ngozi covered her mouth, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Now she understood the coldness, the darkness in his eyes. Emeka, I didn't know. No one knows. I bought the judge's silence, just as they did to avoid prison, but I swore I would destroy them, not by killing them. That's too easy. I wanted to take everything they love, everything they own, all their legacy. Emeka approached the bed, his eyes fixed on Ngozi's belly. And now destiny hands me this. He placed a hand on the sheet near Ngozi's legs, but without touching her. That child carries Kunle's blood. He is the biological heir, Mrs. Obaseki so desires to continue her lineage. But she will never know, and if she does, she will never touch him. Ngozi felt a shiver. Emeka's gaze had changed. It was no longer pain. It was a terrifying determination. What do you mean? That child will be born in my house, Emeka declared firmly. He will bear my name. He will be an Okoro. I will raise him as my own. I will give him all the power, all the education, and all the strength that Kunle never had. And he will be my final revenge. I will raise Mrs. Obaseki's grandson to be everything she hates. A righteous, strong man, loyal to me. I will steal her progeny, just as she stole mine. Emeka, that's madness, Ngozi whispered, frightened by the intensity of his plan. No, Ngozi, that is divine justice. He leaned over her, resting his hands on the bed rails, enclosing her. You need protection for that baby. Kunle is a gambler and a thief. Mrs. Obaseki is a viper who would take him from you to raise him in her own image. With me, he will be safe. With me, he will be a king. He looked into her eyes, and this time Ngozi saw something more than revenge. She saw a desperate need to fill the void that the death of his family had left. Stay. Be my wife for real, not for love, but for him. Let's make this pact. I protect your son from the world, and you give me the heir they stole from me. Do you accept? Ngozi looked at her belly. Then she looked at the tormented man in front of her. She knew it was a pact born of pain and revenge. But thinking of her son in Mrs. Obaseki's hands, or starving with a fugitive father, the answer was clear. A mother's instinct roared louder than fear. I accept, she said, and they sealed the destiny of the three of them in that hospital room. The return to the Okoro mansion was radically different from the wedding day. If then the silence had been a wall of ice, now it was a silence charged with electricity, with a shared purpose. The luxury SUV glided along the nocturnal highway under a torrential rain, but inside, the atmosphere was one of tense, protective calm. Ngozi rested her head against the cold glass, her hand still on her belly, processing the dizzying turn her life had taken. She was no longer the trophy wife bought to close a deal. She was the vessel of Emeka's revenge, and strangely, that made her feel safer than ever. Emeka wasn't working. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was sitting beside her, not opposite, breaking the physical barrier he himself had imposed days earlier. His gaze was fixed on the road, but his body was subtly inclined towards her, in a posture of permanent guard. When we arrive, things are going to change, he said, his deep voice competing with the sound of the rain. No one outside that hospital room will know the truth about the dates. To the world, this child is mine. He was conceived before the wedding in a passionate and secret romance we kept from the press. That will be the official story. People can count Emeka, Ngozi whispered fearfully. If he's born early, then they'll say he was premature and praise our fortitude. He cut in with that arrogance so natural to him. And if anyone dares to question the paternity, they will face my legal team and my personal wrath. You just worry about taking care of yourself. I'll handle the rest. Upon arriving at the mansion, the change was immediate. Emeka didn't wait for the driver to open the door. He stepped out into the rain, circled the car, and opened Ngozi's door, offering her a hand to help her out. But when she put a foot on the ground, he shook his head, seeing her waver slightly from exhaustion. Without asking permission, he lifted her into his arms. Ngozi let out a small gasp of surprise, clutching his neck. "I can walk, Emeka." "You're not walking." The doctor said absolute rest for 48 hours. "And in this house, my orders are followed." He entered the mansion carrying her as if she weighed nothing, crossing the main threshold with an authority that left the service staff paralyzed. Mrs. Kemi, the housekeeper, quickly approached, her eyes wide at seeing her boss, always so distant and averse to physical contact, holding his wife against his rain-soaked chest. "Sir, should I call the doctor?" "Mrs. Kemi, gather all staff in the foyer. Now," Emeka ordered without stopping, walking towards the staircase. 5 minutes later, Ngozi was sitting on a velvet armchair in the main living room with a blanket over her legs and a cup of hot tea that Emeka had placed in her hands. In front of them, a line of 15 employees, from gardeners to chefs, waited nervously. Emeka stood before them with his hands behind his back, emanating power. "Listen closely, because I will not repeat myself." His voice resonated through the marble walls. "My wife is expecting a child, my heir." A murmur of surprise and congratulations went through the line, but Emeka raised a hand to silence them. "This means that from this second, the absolute priority of this house is the well-being of Mrs. Ngozi and the baby. If she has a craving at 3 a.m., the chef will get up. If she needs silence, you will stop breathing if necessary. Any stress, any discomfort my wife suffers, I will consider a personal attack against me. And you know I am not a man who forgives attacks. Is that clear?" "Yes, Mr. Okoro," they responded in unison, looking at Ngozi with renewed, fearful respect. Emeka dismissed the staff and turned to Ngozi. The intensity in his eyes softened a little. "You will no longer sleep in the guest room." Ngozi tensed, clutching the teacup. "Emeka, the pact. You said there wouldn't be—" "I'm not talking about my bed, Ngozi," he interrupted softly. "But I don't want you across the hall. I want you in the suite next to mine. There's a connecting door. If something happens to you, if you feel unwell, if you have a nightmare, I want to be able to hear you. I want to be there in 3 seconds." Ngozi nodded, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. "It's not love," she repeated to herself. "It's protection. It's obsession with the baby." But for the first time in her life, someone was putting her at the center of their universe, even if it was for the wrong reasons. That night, settled in her new room, warmer, decorated in cream and gold tones, much less impersonal than the previous one, Ngozi heard the connecting door open. She pretended to be asleep, her heart beating fast. She felt Emeka's presence beside the bed. He didn't touch her. He just stood there in the darkness, watching over her sleep like a silent guardian. "Rest, little one," she heard him whisper. And she knew he wasn't talking to her, but to the belly that was just beginning to swell. "I promise you, no one will harm you, not even your own blood." Months flew by, transforming the cold mansion into a home that revolved around the life growing inside Ngozi. Emeka's transformation was slow but undeniable. He was still the business shark, the feared man who destroyed competitors with a phone call, but at home, the armor began to show cracks. Ngozi was 5 months pregnant. Her belly was already evident, round and prominent. The morning began with the usual ritual. Emeka entering her room before going to the office, personally bringing a tray with chopped fruit and savory crackers, because he had learned it was the only thing that calmed her morning sickness. "You have an obstetrician appointment at 11, he said, placing the tray on the bedside table and sitting on the edge of the bed. He wore an impeccable gray suit, but his tie was slightly crooked. Ngozi, in a reflex action that had become a habit, reached out and straightened it. "I know. Mrs. Kemi will take me. You don't have to cancel your meetings. I know you have the merger with the Asian group. The merger can wait. I'll take you," he stated, taking her hand and squeezing it briefly. "Today is the structural scan. We're going to see his face. I wouldn't miss that for all the money in Asia." Ngozi smiled. Sometimes it was hard for her to remember that this man was not the father. He acted with more devotion than any biological father she had known. He read her parenting books at night. He debated names with deadly seriousness, and had the nursery redesigned 3 times because the lighting wasn't right. The clinic was the most exclusive in the city. They entered through a private door to avoid the press. In the ultrasound room, the light was dim. Emeka stood beside the examination table, holding Ngozi's hand tightly as the doctor glided the transducer over the cold gel on her belly. "There he is," the doctor said, pointing to the large screen on the wall. "It's a boy, and he's perfectly healthy. Look at that spine. The heart is beating strong. The sound of the heartbeat filled the room. Thump, 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 thump. It was a rapid, vigorous sound, full of life. Ngozi looked at the screen, emotional, but then she looked at Emeka. The magnate was pale. His blue eyes were glazed, fixed on the grainy image on the monitor. His breathing had stopped. At that moment, Ngozi knew that Emeka was not seeing Kunle's son. He was seeing the opportunity life had snatched from him years ago. He was seeing redemption. He's strong, Emeka murmured, his voice breaking, unable to tear his gaze away. Look at him, Ngozi. He's a fighter. He extended a trembling hand towards the screen, as if wanting to touch the baby through the glass. Then he lowered his hand to Ngozi's belly and caressed it with infinite, almost reverential tenderness. "Hello, champion," he whispered. "I'm Daddy. It won't be long now." Ngozi felt a tear run down her cheek. At that instant, the pact ceased to be a contract. The lie became truth. Emeka was that child's father, in every way that mattered. As they left the clinic, the bubble of happiness abruptly burst. They decided to have lunch at a nearby Italian restaurant, an elegant place with a terrace. While waiting for dessert, a shadow fell over their table. A sweet, cloying perfume arrived before the voice. "Well, well, if it isn't the happy couple of the year." Ngozi froze, looked up, and met Mrs. Obaseki's viperous eyes. The woman had aged. She looked thinner, more bitter, and her clothes, though still designer, seemed from past seasons. Emeka's financial pressure was working. "Mrs. Obaseki," Emeka said without standing up, wiping his mouth with his napkin with exasperating calm. "I don't recall inviting you to my table. In fact, I believe this restaurant has a strict policy on admitting undesirable persons." Mrs. Obaseki ignored the insult, her eyes piercing like daggers into Ngozi's swollen belly. "So it's true," she said with a twisted, malicious smile. "The quiet mouse is pregnant. How quick, isn't it? Though counting, that belly seems very big for the months you've been married." Ngozi felt panic closing her throat. Mrs. Obaseki was suspecting. If she did the calculations, she would know the child was Kunle's. "Okoro, children grow fast and strong, Mrs. Obaseki. They have good genetics, something your family is unfamiliar with," Emeka responded, his voice dropping in temperature until it froze the air. He slowly stood up, interposing his body between the woman and Ngozi, blocking her view. "You don't fool me, Emeka," Mrs. Obaseki hissed, lowering her voice. "I know my son was with her until the day before the wedding. That bastard she's carrying could be my grandson. And if he is, I have rights." Emeka's laugh was dark, terrifying. It drew the attention of nearby diners. "Rights?" He leaned towards her, intimidating, massive. "You lost your rights the day you raised a coward who abandons women at the altar. You lost your rights when you tried to rob an old woman. But I'm going to tell you something, and listen carefully, because it's the only truth you will hear. That child is mine. He carries my blood because I have claimed him. He is an Okoro. And if you dare to approach him, if you dare to say a single word to the press, or if you look at my wife with those venomous eyes again, I won't just leave you on the street, Mrs. Obaseki. I will put you in a cell so dark you will forget what the sun looks like." "You're threatening me," she stammered, backing away, frightened by the ferocity in his gaze. "I am sentencing you." Emeka took a step forward, forcing her back until she hit the table behind her. "Disappear now, before I decide to buy this restaurant just for the pleasure of personally kicking you out." Mrs. Obaseki looked around. People were murmuring. She realized she had lost. With a huff of indignation and fear, she turned and hastily left the premises. Emeka stood watching her go, his fists clenched. Then he took a deep breath, composed his face, and turned to Ngozi. The concern in his eyes was genuine. "Are you all right? Did she do anything to you? Are you in pain?" he asked, examining her with his gaze. Ngozi shook her head, still trembling from the adrenaline. "I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for always defending us." He took her hand and kissed her knuckles. An intimate gesture he had never made in public. "You two are all that matters. Let's go home." That night, back in the security of the mansion, something happened that changed their dynamic forever. Ngozi was lying in bed reading when she felt a strong kick, stronger than ever. "Emeka," she called instinctively towards the open door. He appeared in seconds in pajamas with a book in his hand and an alert look on his face. "What's wrong? Are you in pain?" "No, no. Come quickly." Emeka approached hesitantly. Ngozi took his large, calloused hand and placed it on her belly on the right side. "Wait there." Seconds of silence. And then, thump! A firm kick against Emeka's palm. The man's eyes widened. He looked at her, then at his hand. then at her again. A smile, the first truly open and luminous smile Ngozi had ever seen from him, broke his serious face. "I felt it," he whispered, marveling like a child. "I felt it. He has strength. He has so much strength." Emeka did not remove his hand. He sat on the bed, caressing the bump where life was growing. Ngozi watched him. The light from the bedside lamp softened his features. She no longer saw the vengeful magnate. She saw a man desperate to love. And at that moment, feeling his warmth and his joy, Ngozi realized something both terrifying and wonderful. She was falling in love with her husband. She was falling in love with her child's father. "Thank you, Ngozi," he said softly, looking into her eyes with an intensity that stole her breath. "Thank you for giving me this. Thank you for saving us," she responded. Their faces were close. The moment was perfect. The magnetic tension that had always been there became unbearable. Emeka lowered his gaze to her lips. Ngozi held her breath, waiting, wanting, but he stopped millimeters away. "Rest," he whispered hoarsely, pulling back with effort, as if it physically pained him to move away from her. "Tomorrow will be a long day." He got up and went to his room, closing the door. But this time, Ngozi knew he wasn't fleeing from her out of indifference, but because the fire between them was beginning to be uncontrollable. And Chief Emeka Okoro was a man who didn't know how to handle anything that wasn't a contract. The afternoon fell over the Okoro mansion, painting the sky in violet and orange tones, a deceptive calm that preceded the storm. Ngozi, 8 months pregnant, walked slowly through the back garden. The doctor had recommended gentle walks to improve circulation, and the rose garden, obsessively cared for by the gardeners, was her peaceful refuge. Emeka had not yet arrived from the office. The merger with the Asian group was in its final phase, and meetings extended late. Although he called her religiously every 2 hours to check on her, Ngozi stopped near the wrought iron perimeter fence that separated the property from a private wooded street. She felt heavy, tired, but strangely full. She caressed her belly, feeling a vigorous kick. "Almost there, my love. We'll meet you soon," Ngozi whispered. The voice was a raspy whisper, like the sound of dry leaves dragged by the wind. Ngozi froze. It wasn't Emeka's voice. It was a voice that belonged to a life she thought was buried. She slowly turned towards the fence. Among the decorative bushes, clinging to the black bars like a desperate prisoner, was a man. It took her a few seconds to recognize him. He wore a cap pulled low over his eyes, a dirty, oversized jacket, and several weeks of unkempt beard. His eyes were sunken, surrounded by purplish dark circles, and he trembled visibly. It was Kunle, the Prince Charming who had stood her up, the man who had promised her the world. Now he looked like a beggar. "Kunle?" she asked, instinctively stepping back, protecting her belly with both hands. "Ngozi, please, don't shout," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Don't call the guards, I just want to talk. I need to talk to you." "Talk?" Ngozi felt a wave of disbelief mixed with disgust. "You left me at the altar, Kunle. You stole from my grandmother. You left us in ruin. And you come here to talk? Get lost or I'll shout." "I had no choice," he shrieked in a desperate whisper, pressing his face against the bars. "My mother forced me. She managed the accounts. She told me if I married you, she would disinherit me. She would take everything from me. Ngozi, you know what she's like. I'm a victim too." Ngozi looked at him with pity. Not pity for his situation, but for his small soul. "You are not a victim, Kunle. You are a coward. Emeka told me everything. You went to Dubai with my grandmother's operation money. Your mother didn't do that. You did." Hearing her husband's name, Kunle's face contorted into a sneer of hatred. "Emeka, that damned vulture took everything from me. He blocked my accounts, got me fired. No one wants to hire me in this city. I'm sleeping in a rundown guest house. I'm eating scraps. You're paying for what you did," Ngozi said with a firmness that surprised even herself. She was no longer the girl who cried in the church. She was a woman, a mother, and an Okoro. "Go, Kunle. You have nothing to do here." Kunle changed tactics. His eyes dropped to Ngozi's enormous belly. A twisted, malicious smile appeared on his cracked lips. I don't think I have much to do here." "Look at that belly, Ngozi. 8 months, right? If my calculations aren't wrong, and they never are, that baby isn't the great Mr. Okoro's. That baby is mine." Ngozi felt the air escape her. "He's my husband's son," she retorted, trying to keep her voice firm, though her heart pounded. "Lies," Kunle spat. "I know when I last touched you. I know he's my son, my blood. And Emeka knows it, doesn't he? That's why he's been destroying me. He wants to steal my family because he couldn't take care of his own. Don't you dare talk about him. Ngozi took a step forward, fury overcoming fear. He is more of a father than you could ever be in 1,000 years. He loves this baby. You only see him as a tool, just as you saw me. That child is my passport back to the good life, Ngozi, Kunle said, showing his true colors. The victim mask fell completely. Listen carefully. I need 50 million inches cash tomorrow. If you give me the money, I'll go far away, and you'll never hear from me again. But if you don't give me the money, I'll go to the press. I'll tell the world that the great Chief Emeka Okoro stole a poor, defenseless employee's woman and child. I'll tell everyone that bastard is a fraud. Imagine the scandal. Imagine what his Japanese partners will think. It was dirty, direct blackmail. Ngozi trembled with rage. You're selling your own son for 50 million? I have gambling debts, Ngozi. I need the money. You live in a palace now. You have plenty. Give me the money, and I'll let you play happy families with your billionaire. Ngozi looked at that pathetic man. She remembered the nights she had cried over him. It seemed impossible to have loved someone so empty. No, she said. What? I said no. I'm not giving you a single kobo, and you're not going to ruin my family. Furious, Kunle tried to reach through the bars to grab her. Stupid girl. You don't know who you're messing with. Give me the money or I swear I'll... Suddenly, a pair of blinding lights illuminated the scene. An engine roared. The security patrol car braking sharply a few meters away. 2 armed guards jumped out running, but they weren't the only ones. From the house's terrace, a figure shot out. Emeka had arrived. He had seen the scene from his study balcony. He ran across the lawn with terrifying speed, taking off his jacket as he moved. Get away from her! Emeka roared. Kunle, seeing the magnate approaching like an enraged bull, tried to flee, but tripped over his own feet and fell to the ground on the other side of the fence. The security guards were already on him, pinning him to the earth. Emeka reached the fence, breathing heavily. His gaze was pure homicidal violence. Get him out of here, he ordered his men, and make sure he understands the message that he should never set foot in this postcode again. He's my son, Kunle shouted as they dragged him away. He's my son, and everyone will know it. I'm going to destroy you, Emeka. I'm going to tell the truth. Emeka didn't answer him. He turned to Ngozi, who was pale, hugging herself. The anger vanished from his face instantly, replaced by anxious concern. Ngozi, look at me. Did he hurt you? Ngozi shook her head, tears of tension finally flowing. He wants money, Emeka. He said he would go to the press. He said he would tell everyone the baby is his. Emeka entered the garden and enveloped her in his arms. He hugged her so tightly that Ngozi could feel the frantic beat of his heart. Let him say what he wants, he whispered against her hair, kissing her forehead. He won't blackmail us. Nobody touches my family. Let's go inside. You're freezing. But as they walked towards the house, Ngozi noticed the tension in Emeka's jaw. Kunle was a worm, yes, but a worm with a dangerous truth. And with Mrs. Obaseki behind him, that truth was a ticking time bomb. The bomb exploded at 7 a.m. the next day. Ngozi woke up to the sound of agitated voices in the hallway. Emeka was not in bed. He had started sleeping in the same bed with her weeks ago, though only to hold her, respecting her pregnancy. Ngozi put on a robe and went into the hallway. She saw Mrs. Kemi, the housekeeper, with a look of horror, carrying a coffee tray towards the study. Mrs. Kemi, what's going on? Madam, it's best you don't go downstairs. Mr. Okoro he's very agitated. Ngozi ignored the warning. She went downstairs carefully, feeling a bad premonition in her chest. Upon reaching the main living room, she saw that the enormous flat-screen television was on. On the screen, with a red ticker that read Exclusive, Scandal of the Year, appeared Mrs. Obaseki's face. She was on the country's highest-rated morning show, but she didn't look like the arrogant woman from the restaurant. She wore modest clothes, no makeup, and dabbed fake tears with a handkerchief. Beside her, Kunle looked at the floor, perfectly playing the role of the grieving, humiliated father. They stole everything from us, Mrs. Obaseki said, with a trembling voice to the cameras. That man, Chief Emeka Okoro, used his power and his money to destroy my son. He took his job, blocked us financially, and most cruelly of all, he seduced his innocent fiancée. Ngozi is a sweet girl, but impressionable. He bought her and now she's expecting a child, my grandson, my son's blood, and that magnate intends to register him as his own. It's identity theft. It's moral kidnapping. The indignant presenter looked at the camera. Are you saying, Mrs. Obaseki, that the heir to the Okoro Empire is actually Kunle's son? Of course he is, Kunle intervened, looking up with tearful eyes. We have proof, messages, dates. Ngozi was with me days before that sham wedding. I am the father. I just ask for justice. I just ask to know my son. But Emeka has threatened us with death if we speak. Ngozi covered her mouth, feeling nauseous. It was a master performance. They had turned the truth into a weapon of mass destruction. They had reversed roles. Now Emeka was the powerful, abusive villain, and they were the poor victims of the system. The study door burst open. Emeka stormed out, phone glued to his ear. I don't give a damn what the Japanese investors say. He was shouting. I am not issuing a statement denying my son. Fire them. Sue the channel for defamation. I want that presenter's head on a silver platter by noon. He saw Ngozi standing in front of the TV and abruptly hung up the call. His face was pale, tense. Turn that off. He ordered one of the employees, who rushed to find the remote. I saw it, Emeka, Ngozi said with a trembling voice. They're telling everything. They're lying about you, but they're telling the truth about the baby. Emeka approached her and took her by the shoulders. Listen to me. Truth isn't biology. Truth is who was there. Truth is who took care of you. But the world doesn't see it that way. Ngozi pointed to the window. Outside, beyond the mansion gates, a crowd was visible. Journalists, TV vans, photographers. They had surrounded the house like vultures waiting for carrion. The house's landline phone wouldn't stop ringing. Emeka's mobile vibrated incessantly. The company's shares have fallen 15% in the last hour, Emeka said, admitting for the first time the gravity of the situation. The Japanese partners have paused the merger. They say they cannot associate with someone embroiled in a family theft scandal. It's a matter of honor for them. Ngozi felt the world collapsing around her. You're losing your company because of me. Because of my past. No. Emeka stared at her, his blue eyes burning. I'm losing money. Money can be recovered, family cannot. At that moment, the head of security entered the living room, his face grim. Mr. Okoro, a court order has arrived. What? Emeka let go of Ngozi and walked towards the man. A family court judge has admitted Kunle's lawsuit. They demand an immediate DNA test before birth, alleging risk of flight or alteration of the minor's identity. And there's something else. Speak, Emeka barked. Your own company's board of directors is holding an emergency meeting. They've given you an ultimatum. Either you issue a public statement clarifying that the child is not yours and divorce Mrs. Ngozi to clear your image, or they will remove you as CEO of Okoro Enterprises this afternoon. They allege immoral conduct that harms the brand. The silence that fell in the living room was sepulchral. Ngozi looked at Emeka. He had built that company from scratch. It was his life, his pride, his legacy. And now they asked him to choose, his empire or her and the baby. Mrs. Obaseki had played her master card. She wasn't just seeking money, she sought Emeka's total destruction. She wanted to see him on his knees. Ngozi approached him with tears in her eyes. Emeka, you can't lose your company. It's your life. You are my life, he replied without hesitation, though his voice sounded weary. No, listen to me. If they remove you, you won't have the power to protect us. Mrs. Obaseki will win. Kunle will win. You have to do what they ask. Are you asking me to deny you? Emeka asked, incredulous and hurt. To say my son is a bastard? I'm asking you to be smart. It's me. If you lose power, they will destroy all three of us. Emeka looked at her for a long moment. The internal conflict in his gaze was devastating. He was cornered. On one side, his honor and his love for her. On the other, the power needed to keep them safe. Prepare the car, Emeka told the head of security, his voice turning cold, metallic. We will go to the press conference. What are you going to do? Ngozi asked, frightened by the change in his tone. I'm going to end this. My way. Get dressed, Ngozi. You're coming with me. I won't leave you alone here while the wolves howl outside. Ngozi went up to change, her heart shattered. She didn't know what Emeka was going to say. Was he going to repudiate her to save the company, or was he going to publicly immolate himself? Either way, Mrs. Obaseki had achieved what seemed impossible, breaking the impenetrable fortress of the Okoros. The trap had closed. The Imperial Hotel's conference room was packed. The air was heavy, hot, and smelled of sweat, and the static electricity of hundreds of cameras ready to fire. Journalists pushed each other, eager to capture the Titan's fall. The news that Chief Emeka Okoro, the untouchable magnate, was about to lose his empire over a scandal of women and paternity fraud was perfect fodder for the media vultures. In the private waiting room, behind the stage, the silence was deafening. Emeka adjusted his cufflinks with slow, mechanical movements. His face was pale, but his blue eyes burned with a suicidal determination. "It's decided," he said, without looking at the lawyers who were sweating nervously around him. "I am resigning. I will hand over control of the company to the board. In return, they will issue a statement shielding Ngozi and the child from any future legal attacks. I am withdrawing from public life." "Mr. Okoro, that's madness," his legal advisor stammered. "You are giving up your life's work. Mrs. Obaseki will win. She wanted to see you destroyed, and this is exactly what she seeks. Mrs. Obaseki wants my money and my humiliation. She will have my position, but she will not have my family. If I remain as CEO, the scandal will destroy the company, and the shares will be worthless. If I resign, I save the patrimony for my son and protect my wife. It's the only possible move." Ngozi, sitting on a leather sofa in the corner, her hands on her 8-month belly, listened with a broken heart. She wore a simple, elegant, but sober navy blue dress. Emeka was willing to immolate himself for her. He was going to let the world believe he was a repentant villain or a defeated man just so she could live in peace. "Emeka, no," she whispered, trying to stand with difficulty. He immediately approached her, kneeling in front of her, ignoring the lawyers. "Shh, don't say anything. It's done. When I go out there, I want you to stay here. I don't want you to see them devour me. As soon as I finish, we'll go to the lake house. Away from everything, we'll start anew." He kissed her forehead with a tenderness that contrasted with the chaos awaiting them outside. Then, he stood up, buttoned his jacket, and nodded to the head of security. "Let's go." Emeka walked onto the stage. The burst of flashes was blinding, like a storm of white lightning. The sound of shutters clicked like machine guns. Journalists began shouting questions before he even reached the podium. "Mr. Okoro, is it true you stole your employee's child? Is Emeka going to resign?" "A statement for Kunle's family." Emeka raised a hand, and silence slowly settled, thick with tension. He clutched the edges of the lectern tightly, looking at the crowd with that eagle gaze that used to terrify his competitors. But today, there was something different. Resignation. "Good afternoon," he began with his grave voice that boomed through the speakers. "I have called this press conference to address the recent accusations and to announce an irrevocable decision regarding the future of Okoro Enterprises." He paused, swallowing a lump in his throat. It pained him. Ngozi, who had disobeyed his order and peeked through the side curtains, could see his right hand trembling slightly. "For years, I have prioritized success and power above all else." Emeka veered from the corporate script. "But recently, my priorities have changed. The accusations made by Mrs. Obaseki and her son Kunle have created a climate of instability that my company does not deserve. For the sake of my employees, my partners, and above all, for the sake of my wife and the child we are expecting, I announce my immediate resignation as CEO and chairman of the company." A collective gasp swept through the room. Journalists typed frantically. It had happened. The king was abdicating. "I am withdrawing," Emeka continued, his voice breaking slightly. "And I take full responsibility for not." The shout didn't come from the journalists. It came from the side of the stage. Ngozi emerged from the shadows, walking with difficulty, her enormous belly forward, but her head held high. The security guards tried to stop her, but Emeka shouted at them with instant fury. "Nobody touch her!" Ngozi reached the podium. Emeka looked at her in panic. "Ngozi, go back inside, please. This is for you. I'm not going to let you do this," she said, and her voice, though trembling, was amplified by the microphone, reaching millions of homes watching the live broadcast. "I'm not going to let you lose everything for a lie." She gently took the microphone from his hands. Emeka, paralyzed by surprise and fear that she would suffer stress, did not object. Ngozi turned to the cameras. The lights blinded her, but she imagined she was speaking only to Mrs. Obaseki and Kunle. "My name is Ngozi," she said, and her voice resonated clearly and emotionally. "And I am the woman everyone is talking about. The victim, the fortune hunter, the poor manipulated girl." There was a deathly silence. No one expected the wife to speak. "You have just heard my husband resign his entire life to protect me, because that is what he does. He protects. But what you don't know, what Mrs. Obaseki and her son Kunle forgot to mention in their tearful interview this morning, is the truth of how this story began." Ngozi took a breath, feeling a kick from the baby, as if he too wanted to shout the truth. "Chief Emeka Okoro did not steal me. Chief Emeka Okoro picked me up from the floor when the man who claims to be my child's father left me abandoned at an altar in front of 300 people. Ngozi looked directly into the central camera. Kunle didn't flee out of fear of commitment. Kunle fled because he is a thief. Murmurs began to grow in the room. Yes, biologically this baby has Kunle's blood, Ngozi admitted, touching her belly. And that is my greatest shame. Having loved a man who stole my grandmother's life savings, an 80-year-old woman, to go party in Dubai while I cried in the church. Emeka knew this. He knew I was pregnant with another man's child. And do you know what he did? He didn't throw me out. He didn't humiliate me. He didn't marry me. He gave me a home. He gave me dignity. And he loved this baby from the very first moment, more than his biological father ever could. Kunle returned yesterday, not to meet his son, but to ask me for 50 million inches exchange for his silence. He sold his own son, and when I refused, he went on television to destroy the only man who has behaved like a true father. Ngozi turned to Emeka, her eyes full of tears. You are not going to resign, my love. You are not going to pay for their sins. Today, the silence ends. The atmosphere in the room had changed radically. It was no longer a circus of execution. It was a human drama that had all the journalists mesmerized. The narrative of the evil rich man was crumbling before the brutal sincerity of a desperate mother. Proof! And skeptical journalists shouted from the third row. Those are very nice words, madam. But Kunle presented messages. Do you have proof of that theft? Ngozi smiled. A sad but triumphant smile. She took a black leather folder from under the lectern, which she had taken from Emeka's study that same morning when he was distracted arguing with the lawyers. Emeka didn't want to use this, Ngozi said, opening the folder. Because unlike them, he has pity. He didn't want to send his child's father to prison. But I am the mother, and I have no pity for those who threaten my family. Ngozi pulled out a stack of documents and held them up high. Here are the bank statements. The transfer of my grandmother's savings to Kunle's personal account the day before the wedding. The luxury hotel receipts in Dubai in Kunle's name, paid with that stolen money. She threw the papers onto the podium table, where the cameras immediately zoomed in. And here, she continued, pulling out another, older, yellow document, is the reason why Mrs. Obaseki hates us so much. Emeka tensed. He knew what it was. It was the accident report of his first wife. Ngozi, no, he whispered. The world must know, Emeka, she said firmly. This is the expert report of the accident where Emeka's first wife and daughter died 5 years ago. The accident was caused by criminal negligence in the road construction. The construction company falsified the asphalt quality reports to save millions. The owner of that construction company is Mrs. Obaseki. A roar swept through the room. Journalists stood up. It was a nuclear bomb. She killed his family out of greed, Ngozi shouted, her voice broken by tears and rage. And now she wanted to destroy the new family he tried to build. These are the victims you are defending. At that moment, the back doors of the hall burst open violently. It wasn't more journalists. It was uniformed police officers, accompanied by a prosecutor. Among the press crowd, camouflaged at the back, to enjoy the spectacle of Emeka's resignation, were Mrs. Obaseki and Kunle. They had come to see their enemy fall from the front row, but now the cameras turned to them. Mrs. Obaseki's face was a mask of absolute terror. The color had left her face. Kunle tried to slip towards the emergency exit, but 2 officers cut off his path. Mrs. Obaseki and Kunle, the commanding officer shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. You are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, extortion, and involuntary manslaughter. The chaos was total. Cameras captured the exact moment Kunle, crying like a child, was handcuffed against the wall. It was her. It was my mother's idea. I just wanted the money. Kunle shrieked, betraying his mother at the last second, confirming his cowardice to the entire world. Mrs. Obaseki, for her part, did not scream. She held her head high as she was handcuffed, looking at Ngozi with a hatred so pure it chilled the blood. But as she passed the stage, escorted by the police, Emeka stepped down from the podium and stood at the edge, looking down at her. Mrs. Obaseki paused for a second. I'll take him from you, she hissed. That bastard is my grandson. That child is an Okoro, Emeka replied with glacial calm. And you are going to spend the rest of your life watching him grow up happy from a concrete cell. Goodbye, Mrs. Obaseki. They led her away. The flashes didn't stop. The live broadcast showed the villainess being dragged out of her own trap. On the stage, the adrenaline abruptly left Ngozi's body. Her legs gave way. The world began to spin. Emeka, she whispered, feeling herself faint. Emeka, who hadn't taken his eyes off her for a second, caught her before she hit the floor. He held her tightly against his chest, burying his face in her neck, not caring that the whole world was watching. "I've got you," he told her in a voice broken by emotion. "I've got you, my love. You did it. You saved us." Ngozi clung to his shirt, crying with relief. "I wasn't going to let them win. We are a family." Emeka looked up at the journalists, who now kept a respectful, almost reverential silence before the scene. He no longer saw enemies. He saw witnesses to his victory. "The conference is over," Emeka said, without letting go of his wife. "Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife and my son need to rest." He lifted Ngozi into his arms, just as he had that night in the rain, and exited the stage amidst spontaneous applause from some moved journalists. In the safety of the back corridor, away from the cameras, Emeka gently lowered her, but did not let go. He rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. Both were trembling. "Never. No one has ever done something like that for me," he whispered, and a solitary tear rolled down his hard cheek. "You defended me. You saved my legacy. You saved my life, Emeka," she responded, caressing his face. "We're even." He shook his head, and for the first time, he kissed her. It wasn't the possessive, theatrical kiss of the wedding. It was a slow kiss, full of gratitude, relief, and a deep love that was finally allowed to emerge. "I love you, Ngozi," he confessed against her lips. "And I love our son." Ngozi smiled, exhausted but happy. "And we love you." But the peace was short-lived. Ngozi grimaced in sudden pain, putting her hand on her lower belly and letting out a sharp moan. "Ngozi!" Emeka instantly became alarmed. "What's wrong?" Ngozi looked at him with wide eyes, feeling a warm liquid run down her legs, wetting the corridor floor. "Emeka, I think your son wants to meet his daddy right now. My water, the magnate, the man who had just reclaimed his empire and sent his enemies to prison, turned paler than he had during the entire conference. Now? Here now!" she cried out amidst a strong contraction. "Doctor! The car!" Emeka began shouting, running down the corridor with her in his arms again. First time Father Panic erased any trace of the cold businessman. "Hold on, champion, hold on, Ngozi." The sound of police sirens taking misses. Obaseki away mingled with Emeka's shouts, demanding passage to take his wife to the hospital. Destiny had closed a cycle. While the villains fell into darkness, a new life was about to come into the light. The chaos that followed in the hotel corridor was a blur of flashing lights, shouts, and adrenaline. Chief Emeka Okoro, the man who controlled financial empires with a snap of his fingers, found himself entirely at the mercy of nature. In the ambulance, he held Ngozi's hand with such force that his knuckles were white. His face, bathed in cold sweat, reflected an ancient terror, the ghost of his past lurking. He had lost a family in an accident. The idea that something would go wrong now, at the moment of his victory, paralyzed him. "Breathe, Emeka, you breathe," Ngozi panted between contractions, ironically being the one to comfort him despite the pain that was splitting her hips. "I'm not going to die. I'm not leaving you. Don't say it. Don't even think it," he responded in a hoarse voice, frantically kissing her hands. "You'll be fine. Both of you will be fine. I swear if this ambulance doesn't go faster, I'll buy the paramedic company and fire everyone." They arrived at the private hospital, the doors opened, and a medical team, previously alerted by the head of security, was already waiting. Emeka ran alongside the gurney, ignoring the nurses who tried to ask him to wait outside. "I'm the father!" he roared with an authority that brooked no argument. "No one is taking me out of that room!" The labor was long and difficult. Hours passed, and the tension in the delivery room was palpable. Ngozi was exhausted, her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her strength faltering. Emeka was her anchor. He whispered words of encouragement, wiped her face, supported her back. In that aseptic room, the great magnate shed all his armor. There was no money, no press, no enemies. Just a man and a woman fighting to bring life into the world. "One more time, Ngozi. Just one more time. I see him," the doctor exclaimed. With a final scream that seemed to tear the universe, a baby's cry broke the silence. A strong, vigorous, indignant cry. Emeka stood motionless. Time stopped. He watched as the doctor lifted the child. A small, red creature, covered in vernix, but kicking with furious energy. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, placing him on Ngozi's chest. Emeka approached slowly, as if approaching a deity. He looked at the baby. His eyes scanned every inch of his face. He instinctively looked for Kunli's features, shadows of the past, but found none of that. As he watched that child cling to Ngozi's finger, Emeka did not see alien biology. He saw the miracle that had restored his soul. The baby opened his eyes momentarily. They were dark, deep. Emeka extended a trembling finger and stroked the newborn's soft cheek. The baby turned his head, and by reflex, trapped Emeka's finger with his tiny hand. The grip was firm, strong. In that instant, any doubt, any genetic ghost, any lingering resentment towards the child's origin evaporated forever. DNA didn't matter. Blood didn't matter. That grip was a contract more binding than any legal document Emeka had ever signed. "Hello, son," Emeka whispered, and the tears he had held back for 5 years of grief finally broke, falling freely onto the hospital sheet. "Welcome home, Obinna." "Obinna?" Ngozi asked weakly, smiling through her tears. "Obinna, father's heart, the one who brings good news," he said, kissing his wife's forehead, and then his son's head. "Because he is the best news I have ever received in my life." The following weeks were a mix of justice and peace. While Ngozi and Obinna adjusted to life in the mansion, the outside world burned. But this time the fire did not touch them. Newspapers detailed the swift and brutal trial of Mrs. Obaseki and Kunle. The evidence presented by Ngozi at the conference had been irrefutable. The prosecution showed no mercy. Mrs. Obaseki was sentenced to 20 years in prison for involuntary manslaughter and massive fraud. Kunle, with his weak character, tried to negotiate, but his own extortion messages sunk him. He was given 15 years. The day the sentence was handed down, Emeka was in his study, but not working. He was with Ngozi's grandmother, Mama Chinyere. The elderly woman, now recovered thanks to the eye surgery Emeka had personally paid for and supervised with the best specialist from Switzerland, was sitting in the leather armchair, holding her great-grandson Obinna in her arms. "I never thought I would see this," the old woman said, caressing the baby's head. "I thought I would die blind and poor, watching my granddaughter suffer." "You are an angel, Mr. Emeka." Emeka, who was pouring tea himself, having forbidden the staff from interrupting that moment, shook his head. "I am not an angel, Mama. I am a man who got lucky. Ngozi saved me." "No, it's the other way around. Are they gone now, aren't they?" she asked, referring to the Obasekis. "They are gone," Emeka confirmed, looking out the window towards the garden where the new swings were already installed. "They no longer exist for us. Their names are forbidden in this house. Obinna will never know about them until he is a man and can understand the wickedness of the world. For him, his story begins here." 2 years later, the Okoro mansion was no longer the cold concrete and glass mausoleum. Ngozi had known that fateful wedding night. Now the immaculate lawn was dotted with brightly colored toys. A red tricycle lay overturned near the marble fountain. Music emanated from the terrace. The house was alive. Ngozi stepped onto the porch, adjusting a light summer dress. She was radiant. The shadow of the girl humiliated at the altar had completely disappeared, replaced by a confident woman, mistress of herself and her home. "Daddy." "Higher." The cry of joy came from the garden. Ngozi smiled at the scene. Emeka, the feared financial shark, was in his shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled, pushing the swing where Obinna, a robust 2-year-old with curly dark hair and an infectious laugh, soared through the air. Emeka laughed heartily, a sound that 2 years ago seemed impossible from him. "Hold on tight, champion," Emeka shouted, pushing him again. When he saw Ngozi, Emeka gently stopped the swing and picked up Obinna. The child wrapped his arms around his father's neck with absolute naturalness, resting his head on his shoulder. They were perfect for each other. Obinna had copied Emeka's gestures, his way of frowning when concentrated, his way of walking. Biology had lost the battle against love. Obinna was an Okoro through and through. "Are my 2 men ready?" Ngozi asked, coming down the stairs. "We were born ready," Emeka replied, giving his wife a quick kiss on the lips while Obinna made disgusted sounds, provoking laughter from both. "The car is waiting. Where are we going?" Ngozi asked. Emeka had been mysterious all week. "It's our anniversary, but you said dinner was here. There was a change of plans. Trust me." The drive was short, but as the car advanced through the city streets, Ngozi's heart began to pound. She recognized the road. It was the road she had traveled 2.5 years ago, on the worst day of her life. The luxury SUV stopped in front of the old church, the same church of abandonment. Ngozi looked at Emeka, confused and a little anxious. "Why are we here?" "Because we have to rewrite history," he said, taking her hand and intertwining their fingers firmly. "The last time you entered here, you fled from a ghost. Today, you will enter to stay with a reality." They got out of the car. Obinna ran ahead of them, chasing pigeons in the atrium. The church doors were open. But this time there were no 300 murmuring guests, no pitying glances, no venomous mother-in-law in the front row. The church was empty, illuminated by hundreds of candles that created a golden, warm atmosphere. At the foot of the altar, there were only 3 people. The same elderly reverend who smiled nervously, Mama Ciniere, the grandmother, sitting proudly in the first pew, and Mrs. Kemi, the housekeeper, who wiped away a tear of emotion. Emeka guided Ngozi down the central aisle. The sound of their footsteps was no longer funereal. It was a march of victory. "Emeka," she whispered, her eyes filled with tears. They reached the altar. Emeka turned to her, took both her hands. Obinna, sensing the importance of the moment, hugged his father's leg, looking at his mother with adoration. "Ngozi," Emeka began, his voice resonating with a sincerity that made the candle flames tremble. "2 years ago, in this very place, I made you a proposition. I asked you to pretend. I offered you a contract, a business arrangement, a cold salvation. I told you not to expect love." Emeka paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. He caressed her face with infinite tenderness. "I was an arrogant idiot. I didn't know that day. By saving you, I was saving myself. You filled the empty corridors of my house and my soul. You gave me Obinna. You gave me back the ability to feel, to breathe." He knelt, not as an act of submission, but of absolute reverence, and pulled a velvet box from his pocket. When he opened it, there was no ostentatious engagement ring with gigantic diamonds to impress the press. There was a simple antique gold wedding band with an engraved inscription. "This was my mother's ring," he said, with a broken voice. "Only a woman with a pure heart of gold can wear it. Ngozi, I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want contracts anymore. I want you to marry me for real, before God, before our son, and before your grandmother. I want you to be my wife, not out of necessity, but out of choice. Would you do me the honor of marrying me again?" Ngozi wept openly, but they were tears of such intense happiness that it hurt. She looked at the man who had gone from being her tormentor to her savior, and from her savior to her soulmate. She looked at her son clinging to him. "Yes," she responded, kneeling too to be at his height and embracing him. "Yes, Emeka, I choose you today and every day of my life." The reverend, visibly relieved that this time the wedding would have a happy ending, cleared his throat. "Well, I believe the vows have been said. By the power vested in me, and this time with great pleasure, I declare you husband and wife. For real." Emeka stood up, lifting Ngozi with him. Obinna, demanding attention, raised his arms, and Emeka picked him up with one arm, while with the other he held Ngozi by the waist. They stood there for a moment, the 3 of them embracing at the altar, a family forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by unconditional love. The candlelight illuminated their faces, forever erasing the shadows of Mrs. Obaseki and Kunle. Emeka leaned towards Ngozi's ear. The closeness reminded her of that terrible and electrifying moment 2 years ago. But this time his breath was warm, and his intentions were pure. "Recreating the gesture," Emeka whispered, but his words closed the perfect cycle of their destiny. "Thank you for pretending I was the groom that day," he murmured, brushing her lips with his. "Thank you, because in the end, pretending was the only way to find my only truth. I love you." Ngozi smiled against his lips, closing her eyes. "I love you too, my billionaire savior." They kissed, and this time the church did not remain silent. Mama Ciniere applauded. Mrs. Kemi sobbed with joy, and little Obinna let out a giggle that echoed up to the dome, announcing that the solitude of the Okoros had ended forever.